A small body hit the frozen ground. Knees first, then palms. Blood smeared across the ice. A boy, couldn't have been more than 10, pushed himself back up. His lips were blue. His fingers were raw. He had no shoes, just a coat. One coat, too big for him, wrapped around his thin shoulders. It was the last thing he owned. 20 feet ahead, a girl lay curled against a stone wall. She wasn't moving. Frost covered her hair. Her skin had gone white. She was dying. The boy didn't hesitate. He pulled the coat off his back and draped it over her. His name was Cale. He had nothing. No pack. No family. No rank. And he had just given his last possession to the freezing daughter of the most dangerous Alpha King alive. What happened next turned an entire kingdom upside down. Stay with me on this one. The border guards found them just before dawn. 2 wolves in patrol formation came through the northern pass and caught a scent that stopped them cold. One of them, a heavy-set beta named Corin, shifted back to human form and knelt beside the girl. He recognized her immediately. She was Lyra, youngest daughter of Alpha King Varen. She'd been separated from a border escort during a storm the night before. Half the kingdom was out searching for her. She was breathing, barely. Someone had wrapped a coat around her. A filthy, torn, oversized coat that smelled like wood smoke and hunger. Corin looked up and saw the boy. He was sitting 5 feet away with his back against the wall, shirtless in the freezing air, arms wrapped around his own ribs. He wasn't shivering anymore. That's the part that worried Corin. When someone stops shivering, it means their body has given up trying to fight the cold. It means you're running out of time. The boy didn't run, didn't speak, just watched them with dark eyes that looked way too old for his face. Corin's partner, a younger wolf named Hest, grabbed Cale by the arm and hauled him up. "Who are you? What pack?" No answer. "I said what pack?" "No pack," Cale whispered, and that was the worst thing he could have said. Because in this world, a wolf without a pack was nothing. Less than nothing. No pack meant no protection, no rights, no law that applied to you. A packless wolf could be killed on sight and no one would even file a report. They were ghosts, walking targets, the lowest thing you could be. They brought both of them back to the fortress at Ashenmoor. Lyra went to the healers. Cale went to a cell. They put an iron chain around his ankle and bolted it to the stone floor. He didn't resist. He was too cold and too weak to resist. He just sat on the freezing ground, arms around his knees, and waited. Now here's the thing about Alpha King Varen. You need to understand what kind of man we're talking about. Varen didn't become Alpha King by being kind. He became Alpha King by being the last one standing in a war that killed 6 other alphas. He was enormous. 6'5", maybe 6'6", with a jaw like the front end of a truck and hands that could close around a man's skull. His wolf was black, pure black, and when he walked into a room, every wolf in that room felt it in their chest. A weight, pressure, like the air got thicker and heavier just because he was breathing it. He'd ruled Ashenmoor for 15 years. In that time, he'd expanded his territory by 40%, crushed 2 rebellions, and executed more traitors than anyone bothered to count. He never raised his voice, never needed to. His allies feared him. His enemies feared him more. And his own wolves obeyed him not because they loved him, but because the alternative was unthinkable. People who crossed Varen didn't get second chances. They got shallow graves. That was the reputation. And from everything Cale was about to experience firsthand, the reputation was generous. He arrived at the fortress 3 hours after the guards brought Cale in. He didn't go to see his daughter first. He went to see the boy. That tells you something about who Varen was. Strategy before sentiment. Always. Information before emotion. Control before compassion. Varen stood in the doorway of the cell and looked at Cale for a long time. The boy was sitting on the floor. No blanket. No shirt. The chain on his ankle had already rubbed the skin raw and a thin line of blood circled the iron. "You touched my daughter," Varen said. Not a question. Kale looked up. She was dying. That's not what I asked. I put my coat on her. That's all I did. Varen stepped into the cell. The ceiling was low enough that he had to dip his head. He crouched down in front of Kale and studied him the way you'd study a stain you were trying to identify. You're Packless. You're a child. You were alone in the northern pass during a winter storm. Why? Kale said nothing. I could kill you right now, Varen said. His voice was flat. No threat in it. No anger. Just a fact, like telling someone the sky was gray. No one would stop me. No one would care. You understand that. Kale met his eyes. And believe me, that alone took more guts than most grown wolves had. Looking an alpha king in the eye is an act of either courage or insanity, and at 10 years old, there's not much difference between the two. Most adult wolves couldn't hold Varen's gaze for more than a second. This boy held it and didn't blink. I know, Kale said. Varen stood up. He turned toward the door. And that probably would have been the end of the story. The boy would have been killed or thrown back out into the cold, and no one would have remembered his name by next winter. But the door opened before Varen reached it. Lyra was standing there, wrapped in furs, pale as paper, barely able to stand. A healer was trying to pull her back. She shoved past him with everything she had left. He saved me, she said. Her voice was small but steady. I was dying and he gave me his coat. He didn't even know who I was. He just did it. Varen looked at his daughter, then back at the boy. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness. Varen didn't do soft. More like calculation. A new variable had entered the equation and he was running the numbers. Get Selk, he told the guard at the door. Now, Selk was Varen's chief advisor. An old wolf. Thin, careful, with a nose so sharp he could tell you what someone ate 3 days ago just by standing next to them. He'd served Varen's father before him. He arrived within minutes, shuffling down the corridor with that careful walk of his. Varen pointed at Kale. What do you smell? Selk leaned in close. His nostrils flared. Then he went very still. He leaned closer, sniffed again. His whole body went rigid. When he straightened up, his face had changed completely. That's not possible, Selk said. What? Selk looked at Varen, then at the boy, then back at Varen. He lowered his voice, but Kale heard every word. He carries a bloodline marker. Ashford. The room went quiet, completely quiet. Even the guards at the door stopped breathing. See, the Ashford line was supposed to be extinct. 10 years earlier, Varen had gone to war against Alpha Ashford. It was a brutal, ugly campaign, the bloodiest in a generation. When it was over, every Ashford wolf was dead. Every man, every woman, every child. Varen had made sure of it personally. He'd burned their territory to the ground and salted the earth. That's the kind of war it was. Total. Final. The kind of war you fight when you don't just want to win. You want to erase. Or so he thought. They drew Kale's blood that night. Selk ran the test himself. Twice, because the first time he didn't believe the results. And when the second test came back identical, even Varen sat down. Kale wasn't just carrying Ashford blood. He was a direct line heir. The son of the Alpha's brother. The last living member of a bloodline Varen had personally tried to wipe from the face of the earth. This changed everything. Packless orphan was disposable. An Ashford heir was a political weapon. If word got out that an Ashford had survived, it could destabilize every alliance Varen had built in the last decade. Rival packs who resented Varen's rise to power would rally around the boy. He'd become a symbol, a flag to march behind, a living reminder that Varen's war hadn't been as thorough as he claimed. So Varen made a decision. He wouldn't kill Kale. Not yet. He'd keep him, control him, use him if necessary, destroy him if required. The boy was more dangerous alive, but he was also more valuable alive. And Varen always went with the option that preserved the most value. Cale was moved out of the cell that same night. They gave him a room. A small one, barely more than a closet, but it had a bed with actual blankets. Clean clothes that fit reasonably well. A basin of warm water. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, a meal that wasn't stolen or scraped from a garbage pile. Bread. Hot stew. A cup of something warm and sweet he couldn't even name. He sat on the edge of the bed and ate slowly. His hands were shaking, but not from cold this time. He didn't understand what had happened. He didn't know what Ashford meant or why that word had sucked all the air out of the room. He just knew that yesterday he was sleeping in the snow with no hope and no future, and tonight he had a roof and a full stomach and people paying attention to him. He thought the worst was behind him. He was wrong. 3 days passed. Quiet days. Cale stayed in his room. A guard brought meals twice a day. No one spoke to him. No one explained anything. He started to think that maybe this was his life now. A small room in a big fortress. Not free exactly, but not freezing either. Not starving. He could live with that. He'd lived with much worse. On the morning of the 4th day, a messenger arrived at the fortress gates. He was riding hard, his horse foaming at the mouth, and he demanded to see Alpha King Varen immediately. The scroll he carried bore the seals of 3 separate packs. Cale heard the commotion from his room. Boots pounding in the corridor. Raised voices. A door slamming hard enough to shake the walls. Within an hour, everything changed. Word had leaked. Someone in Varen's inner circle had talked. And now 3 rival packs knew that an Ashford heir was alive and sitting inside the walls of Ashenmoor. This is where it turns. Because up until this moment, Cale's story was personal. A boy in the cold. Coat given away. A secret bloodline. But the second those 3 seals hit Varen's table, Cale stopped being a boy with a story. He became a chess piece. A territory marker. A reason for war. The nature of his danger changed completely. It wasn't about one alpha deciding whether to kill or keep him anymore. It was about an entire political system shifting because he existed. The demands came fast. Alpha Tyrus Blackfang, the most aggressive of the 3, sent the simplest message. Hand over the Ashford boy, or we come take him. Varen called a war council. 12 of his top wolves gathered in the Great Hall. Cale wasn't invited, but he pressed his ear to the floor vent in his room and heard every word. Selk spoke first. Kill the boy. Burn the body. Deny everything. We say the rumor was planted by Blackfang to justify aggression. Dragan, Varen's beta, shook his head. Dragan was a political animal. He saw angles where others saw walls. Killing him solves nothing. The rumor is already out. Every pack from here to the southern coast has heard it by now. If we deny it, they'll say we're hiding something. If we produce a body, they'll say we murdered an innocent child to cover our tracks. Either way, we look weak. Then what? Varen said. Dragan leaned forward. Bond him. Betroth him to Lyra. Merge the bloodlines. Make the Ashford line part of our own. Then there's nothing to rally behind. The symbol disappears because the symbol becomes us. The room went quiet again. Cale's stomach dropped through the floor. He was 10 years old. Lyra was 7. And a room full of grown wolves was discussing their marriage like a trade agreement for livestock. Varen didn't answer right away. That silence lasted a long, uncomfortable time. Then he said one word. Possibly. That was enough for Cale. He didn't understand politics or blood bonds or pack strategy. But he understood one thing clearly. He wasn't being rescued. He was being used. And the moment he stopped being useful, the conversation would go right back to Selk's first suggestion. Kill the boy. Burn the body. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. Because what Cale did next is where this story really starts. He ran. He waited until the shift change at midnight. The guard outside his door was the younger one, Hest. Hest had a habit of stepping away to relieve himself at the far end of the corridor around the same time every night. Kale had been counting. 90 seconds. That's how long the doorway stayed unguarded. When Hess turned the corner, Kale opened his door, crossed the corridor, and took the back stairs down to the courtyard. He was fast. Faster than a 10-year-old should have been. The cold hit him immediately, cutting through the clean clothes they'd given him. He had no coat. His coat was still with Lyra. He made it across the courtyard in the dark. Made it to the eastern wall. There was a section where the stones had crumbled and the mortar had given way, and the gap was just wide enough for a small body to squeeze through. He was halfway through the gap when a hand closed around his ankle. Dragan pulled him back like he weighed nothing, threw him onto the frozen ground. Kale's head cracked against the stone. Stars exploded behind his eyes. Before he could get his hands up, Dragan's boot was on his chest, pressing down. "Stupid," Dragan said. He pressed harder. Kale couldn't breathe. "You think you can run? You think there's anywhere in this kingdom you could go where we wouldn't find you inside a day?" He lifted his boot and kicked Kale in the ribs. Once, twice. The second one made something crack. Kale tried to curl up, but Dragan kicked him again, this time in the back. "Enough!" Varen's voice came from behind them. He was standing in the courtyard in just his trousers, barefoot in the snow. He must have heard the commotion from his quarters, or smelled the blood. Either way, he was there. Dragan stepped back immediately. He tried to run. "I can see that." Varen walked over and looked down at Kale. The boy was curled on his side, holding his ribs, breathing in short, shallow gasps. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead where he'd hit the stone. Varen crouched down. "Where were you going to go, boy?" Kale coughed, tasted copper. "Anywhere. There is no anywhere. Not for you. Not anymore." Varen stood up. "Take him to the healers. Then put him back in his room. Double the guard." He turned to Dragan. "Don't touch him again unless I say so. He's worth more than you are right now. And you know I mean that literally. Remember it." And that was it. That was the moment Kale understood the truth of his situation completely. He wasn't a prisoner and he wasn't a guest. He was an investment. And investments are protected. Not because anyone cares about them, but because they have value. The day his value dropped to 0, so did his heartbeat. 7 years passed. I know, that's a big jump. But the years in between were exactly what you'd expect. Training, education, control. Day after day after day. Varen raised Kale inside the fortress like a blade being sharpened on a whetstone. Kale learned to fight and he was frighteningly good at it. He learned hand-to-hand combat, weapons, strategy. He learned to read. Learned pack law, territory maps, military formations, diplomatic protocol. He grew tall. Not as big as Varen, nobody was, but lean and fast with a quiet way of moving that made people nervous even when he was just crossing a room to get water. At 17, he could take down wolves twice his size in the training ring without breaking a sweat. The trainers stopped volunteering to spar with him. The last 3 who did ended up in the healer's quarters. But he was never free. The guards were always there. The walls were always there. And every day he felt the weight of what he was. A tool in someone else's hand. A weapon on someone else's shelf. Lyra was 14 now. She was the only one who treated him like a person instead of an asset. She brought him books. Sat with him at meals when no one else would. Told him about the world outside the fortress walls. A world he hadn't seen in 7 years. "You could ask my father," she said one evening, "to let you go outside. Just for a day. Your father doesn't let. He calculates. And right now, keeping me inside is the better calculation." Lyra was quiet for a moment. "He's not as cold as you think he is. He's exactly as cold as I think. And that's fine. Cold men are predictable. It's the warm ones who surprise you." Their bond was real. Not the political bond Dragan had proposed years ago. That had never been formalized. Varen had shelved the idea, waiting for a moment when it would have maximum strategic impact. But something else had grown between Chaol and Lyra, something quieter and stronger. Trust, respect, the kind of connection that forms when two people survive the same walls together. Neither of them named it out loud. They were both too smart for that. Then the war came. Alpha Tyrus Blackfang had spent 7 years building his coalition. 7 patient years. 5 packs. 30,000 wolves. He'd unified them around a single message. Varen is a tyrant. The Ashford boy is proof. He destroys bloodlines. He hoards power. He must be stopped. Now here's the thing. Tyrus didn't actually care about Chaol. He didn't care about justice or the Ashford legacy or any of the noble-sounding words in his speeches. He cared about territory. Varen controlled the richest lands in the kingdom. The Northern Pass, the Ashenmoor Valley, the silver mines that funded half his military. Tyrus wanted all of it. Chaol was just the excuse he needed to take it. The coalition army arrived at the border on a cold Tuesday morning. 30,000 wolves in formation stretching from one tree line to the other. The largest military force assembled in a generation. Scouts said you could stand on a hill and see nothing but wolves in every direction for a mile. They sent a single demand. Surrender the Ashford heir, or face total annihilation. No negotiation. No middle ground. Hand him over or watch your kingdom burn. Varen's council met that night. The math was brutal and there was no way around it. Varen had 12,000 wolves. Good wolves. Well-trained. Loyal. But 12 against 30 is a death sentence no matter how good your training is. Numbers win wars. Always have. Dragon spoke first. Give them the boy. It's what they want. Give him up and this ends. Selk agreed. The boy for peace. It's the only rational move. We can rebuild our position later. Varen sat at the head of the table and said nothing for a long time. The candles flickered. The room waited. Then he nodded slowly. Prepare the transfer for dawn. Chaol found out from Lyra. She came to his room with tears streaming down her face and her hands shaking. My father is giving you to Blackfang. At dawn. Chaol didn't flinch. Didn't shout. He just stood there for a moment very still, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Then he said, Take me to the council chamber. Lyra hesitated. Chaol, they'll kill you. You know that. Tyrus won't keep you alive. Take me to the council chamber. Now. She did. Chaol walked in and every wolf at that table turned. Varen raised an eyebrow. You weren't summoned, boy. I'm invoking the old law. The room went dead silent. The old law. It was ancient. Older than pack territories, older than council votes, older than the fortress they were sitting in. It predated every political structure in the kingdom. And it was brutally simple. Any wolf of confirmed bloodline could challenge an enemy alpha to single combat to settle a dispute. If the challenger won, the conflict ended. No armies. No war. No siege. Just 2 wolves and a circle of dirt. Varen stared at him. You want to challenge Tyrus Blackfang to single combat? I do. He's 43 years old. He's killed more wolves in single combat than you've sparred with in your entire life. He's undefeated in the ring. I know. You'll die. Maybe. But if I don't do this, your people die. 12,000 wolves. For me. Chaol looked at Varen with those same dark eyes he'd had as a boy sitting in a frozen cell. I won't carry that. I refuse to be the reason 12,000 people die. Varen studied him. And for the first time in 7 years, something crossed his face that wasn't calculation. Something that looked uncomfortably close to respect. Send the challenge, Varen said. Tyrus accepted within the hour. Believe me, he was thrilled. A 17-year-old boy instead of a 30,000 wolf war. He probably laughed when he read the message. They met at neutral ground the next morning. A flat clearing between the 2 territories. Both armies formed a massive circle around the combat ground. 60,000 eyes on 2 wolves. Tyrus shifted first. His wolf was massive, dark gray with a black ridge along the spine and scars crisscrossing his muzzle. He was built for killing and nothing else. Everything about him said this is over before it starts. Cale stepped into the circle. He was calm, too calm for a boy walking into his own death. Lyra was watching from behind Varen's line, gripping the fence rail so hard her knuckles had gone white. Cale shifted, and the entire clearing went silent. 60,000 wolves. Not one sound. His wolf was white, pure, blazing white. Not gray-white, not silver. White like fresh snow under a full moon. A spirit wolf. Nobody had seen a spirit wolf in over 100 years. The legends said spirit wolves were the original bloodline. The first wolves. The ones who came before alphas and betas and omegas existed. Before ranks. Before hierarchies. A spirit wolf didn't fit in the hierarchy because the hierarchy was built after them. They were older than the system itself. Tyrus hesitated. Just for a heartbeat. That was his first mistake. His only mistake. Cale hit him like a freight train. There was no circling. No feeling each other out. No display. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and caught Tyrus mid-turn with jaws that closed around the gray wolf's throat like a steel trap. They went down together. The ground shook. Dust exploded outward. It lasted 11 seconds. People counted. 11 seconds from the first lunge to the moment Tyrus went limp and Cale released his throat. He didn't kill him. He could have. Every single person watching knew he could have torn that throat open and ended it forever. But he opened his jaws and stepped back. Stood over Tyrus's beaten body and just stood there. Tyrus lay on the ground. Beaten. Breathing hard. Alive. His coalition stared. Their unbeatable alpha had just been dropped in 11 seconds by a 17-year-old boy who'd grown up in a closet. The coalition broke apart that same day. Without Tyrus standing undefeated, there was nothing holding 5 packs together. They scattered back to their own territories like they'd never been united at all, and the threat that had loomed over Ashenmoor for 7 years dissolved overnight. Cale shifted back to human form. He was shaking, not from the fight, from what he'd just felt. That wolf, that white wolf, it had been inside him his whole life and he'd never known. He couldn't have known, because he'd spent his whole life too hungry, too cold, too desperate to ever feel anything beyond the next meal and the next night of not dying. He walked back toward Varen's line. Every wolf he passed lowered their head. Not because anyone ordered it. Not because of rank or protocol. Because they felt it. Whatever Cale was, it was something old. Something that commanded respect on a level deeper than any rank or title. Varen was standing at the front. He didn't lower his head. But he didn't need to. The look on his face said everything. Said, I underestimated you. I will not make that mistake again. You could claim territory now, Varen said quietly. By right of combat you could take Tyrus's lands. Any of them. All of them. They're yours. Cale shook his head. I don't want territory. Then what do you want? Cale looked past Varen. Past the army. He looked at the fortress of Ashenmoor in the distance. At the walls that had kept him locked inside for 7 years. I want to choose, he said. For the first time in my life, I want to choose where I go and what I do and who I stand beside. That's all I've ever wanted. That's the only thing I've ever wanted. Varen was quiet for a long time. The wind blew across the clearing. Then he said, You've earned that. And more. 3 days later, Cale stood in the courtyard of the fortress with a small bag over his shoulder. It wasn't much. Some clothes. A knife Lyra had given him. A book of maps. He was ready to leave. Lyra came out to meet him. She was holding something folded carefully over her arms. He recognized it before she was halfway across the courtyard. His breath caught. The coat. His coat. The one he'd given her 7 years ago on the coldest night of his life when he had nothing else to give. She'd kept it. All this time. It had been mended. The tears stitched up with careful, even thread. cleaned and softened by years of care. But it was the same coat. He could see the stain near the collar where his blood had soaked in that first night. She held it out to him. "You'll need this." He took it, held it for a moment, felt the weight of it. It was different now. Not heavier, not lighter, just different, like holding a piece of a life he'd almost forgotten he'd lived. "You kept it," he said. "Of course I kept it. It saved my life." He looked at her. She was taller now, stronger, not the pale, frozen girl curled against a stone wall anymore. And he wasn't the shivering boy with no shoes and no hope. They'd both become something else entirely. Something shaped by the same walls and the same cold nights and the same hard understanding that kindness in a brutal world isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing anyone can do. And sometimes it's the only thing that changes anything. "I'm not leaving forever," he said. "I know. I just need to see what's out there. I need to know who I am when no one is telling me what to be." Lyra smiled. Small but real. "You don't need the coat anymore, Cale. You have a pack now. Whether you're inside these walls or 1,000 miles from here, you have a pack." He put the coat on anyway. It still fit. A little tight across the shoulders now, but it fit. Varen watched from a window above the courtyard. He didn't come down. He didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said between them had already been said in that clearing when a white wolf spared a beaten enemy's life and asked for nothing in return but the right to choose his own path. Cale walked through the gates of Ashenmoor. The morning air was cold, but he barely felt it. For the first time since he was 10 years old, he was walking in a direction he'd chosen himself. Behind him, the fortress stood solid against the gray sky. Inside it, a girl held the memory of a coat that had once saved her life. And ahead of him, the road stretched open and wide and full of absolutely nothing certain. And that was enough. After everything, after all of it, that was enough.